Hello and welcome to this week's Property News Update. These are the stories I'll be talking to Cate Bakos about today in the show. Have we hit the bottom? Well, I'm sure Kate's going to have a view on that. We're seeing much the same picture out of the US. We'll tell you about that story. We're going to take you inside a royal baby's bedroom. Isn't that delightful? And what happens when a bidder bolts? This is a bit of a horror story. And Google, well, they've presented the city of the future. Those and other stories, no, they're not. That's all the stories we're covering this week. We'll be back with Cate Bakos in just a moment.
In today's market, great ideas alone simply aren't enough, but innovative execution can hand you a real competitive advantage. Nightlight is a cutting-edge illuminated signboard by Printforce that offers round-the-clock visibility and features that maximise advertising space, improving your exposure. Buyers can now see the full picture, day or night, with Nightlight's edge-to-edge illuminated surface, which utilises environmentally friendly, scratch-resistant technology. Now available in 6x4 and 8x4. Nightlight is as versatile as you need to be in today's market. Let your clients know you're working day and night for them, and then prove it with Nightlight.
And we say hello to Cate Bakos. Haven't spoken to you for some time. Cate, hello.
Hello. Greetings from sunny Melbourne.
Yeah, Cate, of course, a great buyer's agent, works out of the Melbourne market, has her own business called, strangely enough, Cate Bakos Buyers Agency. Is that what it's called, or just Cate Bakos?
Cate Bakos Property, but that's okay, Kevin. I don't mind. You can make it up.
As long as we get the name right, Cate Bakos. Yeah, good on you, Cate. Lovely photo behind you, or a lovely picture there as well, too.
Oh, yeah.
Is that cosmopolitan early Melbourne or something?
It's my friend's mum's take on Yarraville, which is where we're based. And yeah, she got creative with the colours and we just love it.
Oh, isn't it good? That's good. Okay, well, let's flick to the first story. Have we hit the bottom? What do you reckon, Cate?
I love this question. In fact, I've asked it on a couple of forums and people are chatting about it. Obviously, there are pessimists out there, or maybe people who are really hoping that we haven't hit the bottom because they've been waiting for that bell to ring. Problem is the bell doesn't ring, and it's very, very difficult to just apportion one saying to any given city because we have markets within markets. And I read a really interesting article by Veronica Morgan who talked about the Sydney market, which is where she operates, and her points were really interesting. She profiled a lot of properties that had been purchased between 2016 and 2017 and since sold. And interestingly, in Sydney, not all of those properties sustained a loss in that period. And that particular period was one that, a few people out there were saying Sydney had experienced double-digit falls, and we've all read about that. But the point is it depends on the property, the timing, the price you paid. And the other point I'd like to make is Melbourne and Sydney property are not the only properties in Australia. We've got a lot of markets and we've had some states outperform in those areas.
Interesting to note too that in today's auction update with Kevin Brogan from CoreLogic, we're seeing auction numbers fall in Sydney and Melbourne, but the clearance rates are holding up fairly well, almost up around 70%, which is really good news, Cate.
Well, you've just hit the nail on the head. For me, it's really bad news because the reason why our clearance rates are that high is stock shortage. We've got a real issue with limited stock. And there's always that lag when a market turns. I've worked through 3 markets that have turned around now, so 3 cycles. And it takes a little while for vendors to catch on that the sky isn't falling. And if you're thinking of selling, maybe conditions have improved. So we'll start to see vendors listing their properties in those 2 capital cities. In
that show too, Kevin makes the point that the APRA freeing up of lending criteria is going to help, and it'll probably something we'll see move into the market over the next few months. But anyway, a great story there. Hey, let's have a look at the US market. A similar story here. We're seeing some similarities in the market. This story talking about what's happening in the US market, very, very similar to what we're seeing in Australia.
Yes, there are definitely some some similarities there. They use the word inventory, which I really love. We say stock levels, but most certainly. And the interesting thing here is they've talked about so many different capital cities. Obviously, there's over 50 states in America, so they've got a lot of markets to consider when they start throwing around generic terms about the state of their property market.
Yeah, it once again just for me highlights that this global economy, we're all so dependent on each other, but there are some great similarities. And I remember the time. I mean, buying real estate in the US is very different from buying it in Australia, of course, because you have two different sides, and it is quite different. Yet the movements of the market are quite similar, so it has made it easier for us to become global investors as well, Kate.
It's really interesting, isn't it? So borderless doesn't just mean being able to buy interstate. I know a lot of Australian buyers that have bought property all around the globe, so it's a really, really good point. The interesting thing about that story also is we saw a lot of references to sentiment and to some of their market drivers and some of their ways of trying to overcome that. And they do also talk about their concerns about trade wars. So interesting there. They've obviously got quite a heightened sensitivity to some of the threats to the health of their market.
You'd love this next story, Kate, going into the baby's room. According to recent According to recent reports, Meghan and Prince Harry have spent more than $200,000 on a new, I guess that's Australian dollars, on a new nursery at Frogmore Cottage, which Meghan Markle, in fact, paid for herself. I guess they got a joint account. I don't know. But you know what struck me about this? And actually scroll down into the article and you'll see some examples of what the what do you call it? The
nursery.
Thank you. What the nursery looks like. But what struck me was they call this a cottage, Frogmore Cottage. It's anything. It's almost a palace.
It's a full-on palace. And what could you do with $200,000 if you were investing it? And that would go a long way for your child if you were to put that money into whether it's a property or a special fund. $200,000 is a lot of money, and we all know how long children are in nurseries for. So the pragmatist in me just was baffled. But there are a lot of references in that article that say it's reported to have cost. So what we don't know is, the integrity of that article.
Yeah, well, I think if you've got the money, why not spend it? It doesn't really matter, does it? And, but you're right. How would you spend $200,000 in a nursery? It's quite a really.
I'd buy a neutrally geared property, Kevin, and market for the child.
Oh yeah, that's the practical side of you coming out now, Kate.
Yeah.
Hey, in just a moment, we're going to tell you a horror story of an auction, and I want to get Kate's take on this too, about what happens when a bidder bolts. I don't know whether you know about this story. You know about this instance, do you? Oh, okay. All right. Well, we are going to talk about this. What happens when a bidder bids at an auction, gets it, and then runs away? Back in just a moment. Welcome back to the show. My guest is Cate Bakos, buyer's agent out of Melbourne from Cate Bakos Property. And our next story comes to us from realestate.com.au. This is a story about someone who bid at an auction. I believe it was a vacant block of land. And then on the winning, well, obviously knocked down to this person, then they bolted.
Yes. Not the first time it's happened either, Kevin.
No, well, the story takes the line of ways that this could be overcome, and that is with registration of bidders. How do you feel about that? Let's talk about that, Kate.
Yeah, it is an interesting one. I've bid at so many auctions where someone that we generically term them a walk up, so someone who hadn't seen through the property arrives on auction morning, sees the bell get rung and quickly makes a snap decision to bid on the property. And I've literally been privy to people putting their hand up when I know they haven't walked through the property. So if it's a land value property, it might be a knockdown or a vacant block, that's not an unusual thing. But it's always very challenging when you've just arrived for the auction that you've been prepping for and someone puts their hand up and you know that they're not familiar with that property, because there's such an inherent risk that they could be bidding with a ridiculous figure in mind because they haven't done their homework, or they might actually pull a stunt like this. So in Victoria, we don't have to register for our bidding, and other states do. I often get asked about registration. It certainly could ease this problem, but the benefit for vendors with walk-ups is sometimes your price does go through the roof and you do get lucky. It's unlucky for someone like me who's bidding, but it can happen. And I was actually bidding at an auction years ago. It would have been almost 10 years ago. And one such guy was there and he was just going crazy. So obviously I missed out on this property. I was the underbidder. And when I got the phone call from the agent to say he's done a runner, so he did actually go inside and signed contracts, but all of his checks were bouncing, and it dragged on until everyone realised he shouldn't have been bidding. And I got the phone call, will you honour the price that you're out at? And I said, no, I won't. I'll honour the price before he came in that I was at. Because if he wasn't a genuine bidder, I'm not letting his bids get counted genuinely. And the same could be said for this story. So while that person was the underbidder on a small increment, they wound back their willingness to buy the property for the price that they were at before this person commenced bidding.
Which I understand was about $100,000 less, is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, so that would have been a false party for the vendor while they were standing inside watching it unfold.
You just answer a question here for me, and you may or may not be able to because it's a legal question, but does the seller of that property then have the right to sue that person for the balance, that $100,000, if they can track them down, of course?
Yeah, so my understanding is that if you upset an auction, there are fines for misconduct. So you'll have heard the auctioneer cite the auction rules. Doing something like that at an auction is certainly upsetting the outcome of the auction. Yeah. So yes, if they could catch you, they would.
Yeah, because the auctioneer, correct me if I'm wrong, the auctioneer also has the ability to sign a contract on behalf of the highest bidder.
I couldn't tell you that, Kevin.
I think it is one of the conditions. It may not be the case in Melbourne, and I could stand corrected there, but I know in certain parts of Australia it's one of the conditions that the auctioneer has the authority to sign on behalf of both the buyer and the seller.
Yeah, I know from personal experience. I've had interstate auctioneers take phone bids and sign up a property for me personally. So yeah, you're right on that.
Yeah, maybe it's just not in Melbourne.
Yeah, we need to be able to sign as a buyer's agent for a buyer if we're bidding on their behalf.
Isn't it amazing, Kate, that Melbourne is probably the home of auctions, yet I've got to say it's probably one of the most backward areas when it comes to the method, not so much the methodology. What am I trying to say here about the way it's conducted and how strictly it's scrutinised?
Yeah, there's a lot of art to auctions. Obviously, there's a lot of science, but there's a lot of art. And to see a great auctioneer in full flight being able to get bids out of the crowd, I've seen fabulous auctioneer efforts where they've been able to extract bids from people who didn't plan to bid. And I've seen them also really effectively scrutinise a new random walk-up buyer, having their staff go and chat to them. Obviously, it's a big concern. You don't want to see an auction have that happen. No.
Okay, our final story comes from LinkedIn. We've never used LinkedIn before, but this was an interesting article about Google and how they've created the city of the future. Do you have a passion to go and see this, Kate, to know what real estate's going to be like in the future?
Yeah, I'm always interested.
Okay, well, are you going to go and have a look at it, or was there enough in the article to tell you what it's about?
Yeah, let's chat about our take on it, because we talk about a lot of automation and a lot of change, but there's no doubt about it. Real estate is such a human-to-human business.
Yeah.
It's very, very hard to automate processes because people don't think like robots.
That's right. No, they don't. We've covered a few stories in the past about what the cities of the future are going to look like. And technology now has enabled people to actually, as they've done here, draft out what could be the city of the future and maybe overcome a lot of problems. So technology is really very good at pushing us further forward to see what limits, we may have to overcome in the future. So, which is an interesting story. And I thought, Google are the leaders in this sort of field, so there's got to be a lot of great technology behind this.
Yeah, without a doubt. And when we think about future plans and infrastructure and how we all actually move around and how it will work, I think automation will take us a long way. And we're already using automation with some of our future, 2020, 2030, 2050 plans. It's quite incredible.
So what about you this weekend, Kate? Got a busy weekend ahead?
I'm actually taking the weekend off. I've got Miss Amy doing my auctions. It's a quiet auction weekend for us anyway because we're in school holidays now. But yeah, I'm sneaking away on Friday afternoon and coming back Sunday, so I'm a bit excited.
Oh, well, there you go. Excellent. All right. Well, listen, you have a great weekend and we'll look forward to catching up with you again soon. My guest has been Cate Bakos, Cate Bakos Property in Melbourne. Kate, thanks very much for your time.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Kevin.
And watch out for us. We've got auction update with Kevin Brogan a little bit later today. We also have real estate talk, and I should have mentioned up towards the start of the show. This week in the show, we've got how a federal scheme is not for everyone. Not all spruikers are the same. I'll talk to you about a personal sale experience that we've had. We've just sold our property, and I talked to the buyer's agent who actually helped the buyer buy our property at auction. That's an interesting story, Kate. You want to listen in for that one.
Yeah,
overlooked ways to get onto the property ladder and why it only takes $1 to make a deposit on a home. They're the stories we're going to cover in Real Estate Talk. It's out tomorrow. And Kevin Brogan joins us on Monday with his take on all the auction activity over the weekend. Have a great weekend ahead. I'm Kevin Turner. Thanks again to Cate Bakos. And I look forward to seeing you again next time. See you then.